Recently, you've probably had a fair amount of games like these where almost everyone in the server just has a lot of orange items. So, how do you actually go about countering these heroes like Infernus or Geist or Mirage who just feel like inevitably when the game gets to 30 or 35 minutes, they win you the entire game? Let's talk about some solutions. Now, first of all, I want to acknowledge that gun heroes are definitely overtuned at the moment a little bit, at least on the upper end. Once they get to a certain point in the game, it just feels like they're kind of unstoppable. Now, there are some things that you can definitely do in order to mitigate how strong they're going to be, but it's definitely going to be, it's not going to fully eliminate how strong they are. Most of these choices are through itemization, right? So there are a few things that you can do in order to counter these heroes. One is to disable them somehow, right? So they're generally vulnerable to some type of crowd control, so stun, stuff like that. Now, as far as itemization goes, you don't have a ton of options for that specifically. But the other is building certain items that will just either nullify a bit of their damage, reduce their attack slow, or will also, deal damage back to them, right? So I just want to highlight a few items so we can talk about it. Now, before we go any further, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, myself, as well as a tournament that I'm hosting. So I'm hosting a Death Slam tournament, 2 days, July 5th, July 12th. This is a tournament meant for individuals. So if you just want to play a different Deadlock experience, and you don't need any competitive experience, you don't need a specific rank or anything, you don't need a team, you just need to sign up. So join the Discord for the sign up form. You will get a chance to get coached. If you get chosen, you'll get coached by either me or Pachi Pop. So it's going to be a ton of fun. Obviously, there's a lot of details, but I want to take a lot of time. So there's going to be the link to join the Discord as well as the sign up form below. So make sure to check it out if you got a second. Thank you so much. The first item on my list is Return Fire. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how Return Fire works because I think it's very, very important, right? So Return Fire says automatically fire a bullet towards any attacker who damages you with their abilities or weapon. Now, it's important to note that Return Fire gives you 10% bullet resist just passively. And it returns 60% of the bullet damage as opposed to 30% of the spirit damage. So it's inherently a lot better against gun heroes than against spirit heroes. Now, the way that Return Fire works is that it returns the damage pre any reductions, right? So what that means is if I shoot someone and they have a bunch of resistances, it's actually possible for me to hurt myself more than I hurt them. And I'll showcase this right here. So in this example, I've got an Infernus. And he's got 69% bullet resistance. He's got a bunch of bullet resist items, etc. And I'm Geist here. And I'm going to have him press Return Fire, and then I'm going to start shooting him just so we can see how much damage it's doing. So let me get that going. Clear follow. So as you can see, I'm essentially just killing myself on him, right? So if you look, incoming damage 921 from Return Fire. As outgoing is basically less. I'm hurting myself more than anything, and this is because Return Fire, the way that it works is it returns the damage pre any mitigations, right? So if I was going to do a bunch of damage to him, but that's significantly reduced by the resistances he has, I'm still taking a bunch of damage. Now I just want to clear out, I haven't actually done the math, but this is how it looks like it works, and so I'm pretty confident it works that way, but make sure you take it with a grain of salt. Basically, this item is incredibly potent and very, very powerful at countering, these heroes. Now, obviously, the biggest downside is it only lasts 6 seconds, but it will do a ton of damage to any weapon hero shooting you. Next, I want to talk about Suppressor. This item is probably one of the most underbought items at lower levels that I see. The stats on this item are actually crazy if you have any hero that can apply it even remotely often. So you get 6 spirit power, 75 health, and you slow any hero's fire rate by 35% for 4 seconds when you apply spirit damage. A lot of heroes can apply this fairly easily, and 35% fire rate slow is definitely nothing to scoff at. When you look at gun items, for example, Swift Striker is the same cost and gives you 20% fire rate. So Suppressor slows their fire rate by almost double the value of Swift Striker for the same cost, so it's very, very efficient. The biggest problem with this item is that there is no upgrade, right? So eventually fire rate just gets out of control, but in the early to mid game, that 35% matters a lot. But once it gets to 30-35 minutes, if they have a bunch of fire rate items, it's not going to matter as much. And the reason for that is because of how fire rate slows work. So for those that don't know, fire rate slows, the way that it works is, let's say that I'm Geist and I have let me give myself some fire rate, right? By the time, guys, I have burst fire, swift striker, and I have 30% fire rate, right? So if someone uses suppressor on me, I will go from 30% fire rate to minus 5% fire rate. The lowest that any hero can go is minus 50% fire rate, right? However, fire rate slows stack diminishingly. So, for example, let's say that you are, I tested this yesterday. Let's say that you use Lash Flog, which applies 35% fire rate slow. And then on top of that, you use Suppressor, which is another 35%, right? So technically, if you use these two, this should be minus 70% fire rate slow. However, it's actually 58%, right? So stacking fire rate slows, I mean, it's still good, but it does come at a, diminishing return. Whereas stacking fire rate itself does not come at a diminishing return, which is, in my opinion, completely stupid. I don't see why fire rate slows would stack diminishingly if fire rate stacking itself is not diminishing, right? For example, if you look at Shred stacking diminishingly makes sense, right? Like, for example, if you buy Weakening Headshot and if you buy Bullet Resist Shredder, it's going to stack diminishingly. It's not going to do 24%. It's going to do like 21% shred or something. But that makes sense. And the reason why that makes sense is very simply because at the end of the day, when you buy resistances, they also stack diminishingly, right? If I buy Battle Vest, 18%, okay, I have 18%. And then I buy Return Fire, I'm at 26%, not 28, right? So buying things also stacks it diminishingly. And therefore, when you reduce it, it also reduces it diminishingly. But with fire rate, it's like, hey, you can buy as much fire rate as you want, but fire rate slows, well, they're going to stack diminishingly. So personally, I don't think that makes any sense, but that's how it works right now. So just wanted to give you guys the knowledge. And Suppressor is a great option for that. Now, if we're to talk about Disarming Hex here, this is technically another good option. The only problem is that this item honestly really feels kind of hard to slot for, what it does, essentially. It builds out of Rusted Barrel, but Rusted Barrel just kind of sucks. Like, you pay 800 to essentially get the same value as Suppressor, but it only lasts 5 seconds, and it has a 30-second cooldown, so it has a very small amount of uptime, and it feels hard to use this item well in the early game, so it feels kind of worthless. So you kind of want to go straight into Disarming Hex, which is not worthless, which disarms someone for 4 seconds. But honestly, it is kind of hard to slot in. Now, I do want to remind people that this item exists and that it's good, but I don't think that it's really that great of an answer, but it is a bit of an answer to M1 heroes. I think an item that's very often forgotten about is Warpstone. Now, I'm not saying it forgotten about, but like in the sense that it does give you a ton of bullet resist. Like for the money, 40% bullet resist is crazy value, especially when you consider the fact that it allows you to be extremely mobile. So one way to counter gun heroes, so the difference between gun and spirit heroes is that spirit heroes generally do a burst amount of damage, and their abilities are generally like very consistent to hit even on moving targets, right? A lot of spirit heroes, they have AoE abilities, so even if you're moving, they just boom, do like a bunch of bursts to you very quickly, even if you're flying through the air. As far as gun heroes require aim, right? So if you're moving very erratically, for example, let's say I have Warpstone Stamina Mastery, right? And this guy's shooting me, and then all of a sudden I'm just like hopping around, just going around walls to walls, just making my movement like as unpredictable as possible. That makes me a lot harder to hit for the gun, and so therefore like mobility is survivability against these heroes, right? And so I think Warpstone is still a great answer. And if we talk a little bit about bullet resilience as well, so the way that bullet resilience works is the 30% additional bullet resist that you get when you're below 30 health is additive, right? So it's not, generally when you stack resistances, it's multiplicative. But in this case, since it's the same source, right, it comes from the same item, it's not multiplicative, right? So as you can see, I have 30%, and I'll go to 60% if I'm, below the threshold. So this item is very, 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 very strong at, countering these M1 heroes. Last but not least, let's talk about plated armor. So this item has deflection percent and on-hit prevention percent. So this item is incredibly valuable. However, I would not recommend that you go this item before you have some sort of bullet resistance, just because it's not as efficient mathematically. Now, there are people smarter than me that have figured this out, right? So I'm just here to tell you that generally, if you go plated armor and you want some answers to gun, you're going to be better off, like, for example, buying bullet resilience first and then going into plated armor, right? Plated armor is incredibly strong because of its on-hit prevention percent, especially with Infernus being like extremely meta right now and just very, very strong and feeling almost uncounterable. Having 50% on-hit prevention percent makes him, you know, way, 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 way weaker against you because he struggles to apply his Afterburn, right? And I can show this to you very quickly. Let me just go to Infernus. So this is how many bullets it takes me to proc Afterburn on an Infernus with no items. I'm just shoot him. I would say roughly it's 9 if I don't miss any bullets or anything. You know, it's 8 or 9 bullets. And this is how many it takes me when he has plated armor. So when he's got plated armor, it looks like this. Takes roughly double, maybe not double, but you know, I guess 50% more is exactly what it takes pretty much, which is a lot, especially, you know, in situations where there's a lot of moving around and stuff like that. And also especially when you consider that the on-hit prevention also works against toxic bullets, right? And toxic bullets is an extremely common item that's bought right now. So if you can prevent toxic bullets and Afterburn from being applied to you with this item, it's very, very valuable. I think that Phantom Strike is also an item that's worth mentioning. This item is essentially just like a better Disarming Hex. Like, it disarms people, but it's an item that feels good to buy on some heroes, right? So there's certain heroes, if you want to get in their face, it's good to buy it on. For example, Abrams is a great candidate for this. We've seen Hoot buy it on Warden a bunch, right? So you know, any hero that likes to close the gap on them, you can buy Phantom Strike on. The stats are good. It's a green item instead of a purple item, so it gives you a lot of health. It makes you tankier. It does damage. It reduces their move speed. So it's very valuable overall and can be a decent option, but it's not going to like fully counter the gun heroes. It's just going to help. That's it, guys. I just wanted to make a quick video about basically what we can do in this gun meta to try to counter these gun heroes that seem extremely oppressive. The reality is it definitely seems like the meta is very favorable towards gun at the moment, and you know, it has only like shifted more towards it as people have figured out the items for gun and all that stuff, and certain items are definitely problematic, but there are certain things you can do to counter it. So hopefully this video helps you, you know, remind you of some of the strong item choices against gun heroes, and yeah, let me know if you have any feedback in the comments, and I'll see you next time.